My mother-in-law served steaks and desserts to my husband's family, everyone but me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Anna, and I've been married to my husband Blake for 3 years. When I first met him, I thought I was marrying not only the man I loved, but also stepping into a family that would eventually accept me. I was wrong. From the very beginning, his mother, Evie, made it clear I was not welcome. She never shouted, never said anything openly cruel, but her words and actions always carried a sting. A look, a comment, or a laugh at my expense. It was her way of reminding me I didn't belong. That evening, Evie invited the whole family for dinner. Blake's brothers Jason and Mark were there, along with his sister Rachel and her husband Tom. The house smelled incredible, filled with the rich aroma of seared steak, garlic butter, and fresh bread. The table was set with sparkling glasses and polished silverware, everything perfect, as if this was a feast meant to impress. I tried to keep my smile steady, hoping maybe this night would be different. Maybe Evie would finally soften a little toward me. The plates began to arrive, and my heart sank. One by one, everyone was served thick, juicy steaks cooked just right, paired with golden potatoes, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls. The laughter grew louder, the conversation flowing easily. Then, finally, Evie placed a plate in front of me. I looked down. It was nothing but a few limp leaves of lettuce. No dressing, no sides, nothing else. Just lettuce. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I glanced around, hoping maybe this was some kind of mistake, but no one moved to correct it. Jason looked down at his plate and avoided my eyes. Rachel's smile faltered, but she quickly looked away. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even the clink of cutlery seemed louder in that silence. And Blake, my husband, the man who promised to love and protect me, said absolutely nothing. He laughed at something Mark said, cut into his steak, and carried on as though I wasn't even sitting there. I forced myself to lift a piece of lettuce with my fork and chew it slowly, my face burning with shame. Every bite felt heavier than the last. My chest tightened as I swallowed down both the greens and the humiliation. I had no appetite, but I refused to cry at that table. Not in front of them. Evie carried in a tray of desserts after the meal. Rich chocolate cake, fruit tarts, and whipped cream piled high. She passed them around the table with a sweet smile, careful to give everyone a generous slice. Except me. My place stayed empty, as though I didn't exist at all. I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, pretending I didn't notice. But something inside me shifted that night. A quiet snap, the sound of dignity breaking under the weight of silence and betrayal. And that was the moment I knew things could never stay the same. When we got home that night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The quiet of our living room only made the weight on my chest heavier. I turned to Blake and asked, my voice trembling but steady enough, "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let your mom treat me like that in front of everyone?" He didn't even look up from untying his shoes. "Anna, don't make this into a big deal," he muttered. "Mom didn't mean anything by it." The words hit me harder than the humiliation at the table. I stared at him, waiting for more, some kind of reassurance that he saw me, he cared. But he just shrugged and switched on the TV, as if my pain was nothing more than a small annoyance in his evil. That's when the loneliness really set in, not just from Evie's cruelty, but from Blake's silence. He was supposed to be my partner, the one who had my back. Instead, he always found a way to excuse her behavior. I sat there, hugging my knees to my chest, and felt smaller than I had in years. As I stared at the flickering TV screen, a memory pushed its way forward. Our wedding day. I had walked down the aisle in a dress I had chosen with so much love, something that made me feel radiant. But when I reached Blake's side, I caught Evie's face in the crowd. She was whispering to one of Blake's aunts, her lips curling into a smirk. Later, I overheard her saying the dress looked cheap and not fitting for their family. Even on the most important day of my life, she couldn't let me have peace. She barely acknowledged me as her son's wife. At the reception, she spent the entire evening clinging to Blake, pulling him away for photos and conversations, as though I wasn't standing right there in my own gown. Back then, I brushed it aside, telling myself it was just nerves, that she'd warm up eventually. But sitting in that living room after the dinner, I realized it wasn't random. It was a pattern. Evie had always been deliberate, criticizing me in ways that looked harmless on the surface but left deep cuts underneath. From the way she ignored my greetings, to the way she never included me in family plans, to the cruel little smiles when I was excluded, it was all intentional. And Blake let her do it. He always let her. Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. For too long, I had stayed quiet, hoping things would change, hoping Blake would defend me. But hope was useless now. I took a deep breath, sitting up straighter, a strange fire stirring inside me. That night, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't stay quiet anymore. One way or another, things were going to change. It didn't stop after that dinner. In fact, the small betrayals seemed to grow louder once I noticed the pattern. A week later, Blake mentioned casually that he was meeting his mom for lunch at her favorite cafe. I froze. She invited you? I asked. He nodded like it was nothing. Yeah, she texted me this morning. No mention of me. Not even a fake excuse. Just him. Again. I bit my lip so hard it almost bled. It wasn't the lunch itself that hurt. It was the way she went out of her way to leave me out. And the way Blake didn't seem to see anything wrong with it. Christmas came not long after. We all gathered around Evie's living room, the tree glowing with lights, presents piled high. She handed out gifts one by one. Sweaters for Jason and Mark, a designer purse for Rachel, a watch for Tom. When the pile dwindled, I sat there with empty hands, trying not to shift uncomfortably in my seat. Evie smiled sweetly, sipping her wine as though she hadn't forgotten someone. I told myself maybe she had just overlooked it. But when I looked at Blake, hoping he'd notice, he gave me a small shrug, as if to say, "Don't make this into something it's not." I forced a smile to hide the sting in my chest, but inside, I felt invisible. How could a mother so openly exclude me on a holiday meant for family? And how could my husband sit there and let it happen? The remarks were another thing I could never escape. Evie had a way of making them sound light, almost like jokes, but everyone was a blade. "You work at a school, right? Such a sweet little job," she'd say, stressing the word little like I was some child playing dress-up. Or, "That dress looks comfortable," with that sly smile that meant she thought it looked cheap. One night when I offered to help in her kitchen, she handed me a spoon and said, "Don't worry about the seasoning. Cooking takes experience." The laugh that followed made my stomach twist. I started dreading family gathering. My chest tightened every time I knew we were going to her house, because I could predict what would happen. A comment, a slight, a moment that made me feel like I didn't belong. But what broke me more wasn't Evie's cruelty. It was Blake's silence. Each time I confronted him afterward, he repeated the same line. "That's just Mom. Don't take it so personally." But how could I not? When your partner doesn't step in, doesn't defend you, it feels like betrayal from both sides. I was being pushed out of the family by his mother, and Blake was handing her the tools to do it. That night, lying awake in the dark beside him, I whispered the truth I had been too scared to admit. Maybe my husband was betraying me just as much as his mother was. The next time we went to Evie's house, I promised myself I would walk in with my head held high. I told myself maybe, just maybe, things couldn't get worse than before. But I was wrong. They could, and they did. The dining room table was beautifully set that night. Candles glowed in the center, the silverware was polished, and there were enough chairs neatly arranged for everyone, except me. At first, I thought maybe they had just overlooked it, but then Evie walked in carrying a folding chair. She set it up at the far corner of the room, away from the main table. Without a shred of hesitation, she looked right at me and said, "Anna, you can sit there. You know, not everyone belongs at the family table." Her voice was calm, almost casual, but the sting was sharp. The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes darting toward me. My throat tightened, and I waited for Blake to say something, to defend me, to tell his mother she was out of line. But he didn't. Instead, he gave this nervous little laugh, the same kind of laugh he always used when he wanted to smooth things over without taking a stand. His brothers joined in with half-hearted chuckles, like the whole thing was a harmless joke. I could feel my face turning hot as I lowered myself onto the folding chair. It squeaked under me, flimsy and awkward, while everyone else sat comfortably at the big wooden table. Every bite they took, every sip of wine, felt like a reminder that I was on the outside. Rachel, my sister-in-law, glanced at me a few times. Her eyes flickered with what looked like guilt, and I caught her fidgeting with her fork. But she didn't say anything either. No one did. The laughter and conversation picked up again, as if I wasn't even in the room. I tried to swallow my food, but every bite felt heavy. My hands trembled in my lap, and I kept forcing myself not to let the tears spill. Sitting there on that chair, I had never felt so humiliated in my life. Finally, I couldn't do it anymore. I set down my fork and whispered that I wasn't feeling well. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. I grabbed my purse, pushed the folding chair back, and walked out as quietly as I could. The night air hit me like a slap. My car was parked down the street, and as I slid into the driver's seat, the silence wrapped around me. It wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and my reflection in the mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. Driving home alone, I finally admitted the truth I'd been running from. My marriage wasn't strong, wasn't safe, and maybe wasn't even real anymore. It was crumbling right in front of me. I couldn't keep it all bottled inside anymore. The shame, the anger, the loneliness, it was eating me alive. So I called Lauren, my best friend since childhood, the one person who had seen me through every stage of life. She didn't hesitate. "Come over," she said, her voice warm and steady, the way it always had been. When I walked into her cozy apartment, I barely managed a smile before the tears started. She pulled me into a hug and let me sink into her couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. For a few minutes, I just sat there in silence, staring at the steam rising from the mug, trying to find the words. "It's Evie," I finally whispered. My voice cracked as I explained everything. The lettuce plate, the missing gifts, the folding chair, the way she looked right through me as if I didn't matter. But as the words poured out, I realized it wasn't just about Evie. My chest tightened as I said, "And Blake, he never says a word. Not once. He just lets it happen. Sometimes he even laughs." Lauren's eyes darkened. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Anna, listen to me. His mother is cruel, yeah. But Blake, he's the real problem." I blinked at her, not fully ready to hear it, but she didn't back down. "He's supposed to protect you. That's his job as your husband. Not hand you over to her like a sacrifice. Not sit there in silence while she tears you apart." Her words cracked something open inside me. The tears spilled freely now, hot and endless, rolling down my cheeks until I could barely breathe. I pressed my palms to my eyes, shaking my head. I thought marriage meant partnership. I thought he'd stand by me. But instead, it feels like he's standing with her. Lauren slid closer, pulling me into another hug. "You don't deserve that," she said firmly. "You're strong, Anna. You're smart, kind, and loyal. You deserve someone who sees that and defends you, not someone who watches you get hurt." I sobbed harder at her words, because a part of me had been desperate to hear them. For so long, I had convinced myself I was being too sensitive, that maybe I just needed to try harder, smile more, ignore more. But sitting there in Lauren's living room, I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I was being mistreated by Evie, yes, but even more painfully by the man I had promised my life to. Lauren rubbed my back, her voice calm but strong. "You've been quiet too long. It's time to remember you have a voice. And it matters." As I wiped my swollen eyes, something shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of strength. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. That night, I started to consider taking action. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the house felt almost too still. I had been folding laundry in the bedroom, half distracted, when I heard Blake's voice drifting down the hall. He was in the living room, talking on the phone. At first, I didn't think anything of it. He spoke to his mom often, but something in his tone caught my attention. It was lower, almost careful, like he didn't want me to hear. I set the clothes aside and moved closer, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I stood just out of sight, my heart thudding as his words became clear. "Don't worry, Mom," he said with a sigh. "Anna will never be family the way you want. I'll keep her in line." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might be sick. I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe so tightly my knuckles ached. The words replayed in my head like a cruel echo. "I'll keep her in line." He wasn't just ignoring Evie's cruelty. He was agreeing with it, supporting it, shielding her instead of me. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady my breathing as the sound of their conversation went. I didn't hear every word after that. My ears were ringing too loudly, but I didn't need to. I had heard enough. All this time, I had told myself Blake was weak, afraid to stand up to his mother. I had convinced myself that maybe he didn't realize how much it hurt me. But now I knew the truth. He saw it. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was choosing her side. The betrayal hit me harder than anything Evie had ever done. She had always been cruel, but at least she never pretended to love me. Blake had looked me in the eyes, vowed to cherish me, and yet behind closed doors, he was telling his mother he'd keep me in line, like I was a problem to be managed instead of a wife to be loved. My vision blurred with tears. I stumbled back to the bedroom, clutching the edge of the bed, trying to keep myself from collapsing under the weight of it. The ache in my chest spread like fire, but beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir. Rage. It wasn't just about Evie anymore. It wasn't even about the humiliations, the empty plates, or the folding chairs. It was about the man I trusted most, the one who was supposed to fight for me, choosing to betray me in whispers over the phone. I wiped my cheeks, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. My face was red, my eyes swollen, but behind the tears, I saw something I hadn't in a long time: resolve. I whispered to myself, the words heavy but certain, "I will not be the victim anymore." After that day, something inside me shifted. I stopped wasting my breath confronting Blake. Every time I had tried before, it ended the same way: excuses, dismissals, or silence. So instead of arguing, I went quiet. To him, it probably looked like I had given up, but in truth, I was paying closer attention than ever. I began to watch the way things unfolded, how Evie always pulled the strings. She made little digs in conversation, pretending they were harmless jokes. She arranged family outings and always forgot, to mention them to me. She had mastered the art of exclusion while keeping her smile perfectly polished. And every time, Blake either laughed nervously or nodded along. It was like a play they had been rehearsing for years. Evie as the director, Blake as her eager actor, and the rest of the family as silent extras. Jason and Mark cracked jokes and never questioned their mother. Rachel stayed quiet, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to risk rocking the boat. None of them were allies. They weren't cruel like Evie, but their silence made them complicit. And me? I had been cast as the outsider, the one meant to take the insults quietly, to eat my lettuce while everyone else feasted. But now I refused that role. At night, while Blake slept beside me, I lay awake in the dark, my mind spinning. I didn't want petty revenge, snide comments, or cold shoulders. I wanted something bigger, something that couldn't be brushed aside as me being too sensitive. I wanted to expose them both for what they really were, a manipulative mother and a husband who stood against his own wife. The idea began forming slowly, piece by piece. What if I didn't just push back privately? What if I made it impossible for them to hide what they'd done? If Evie loved performing her perfection act in front of others, then maybe the stage she had built would be the very place where it all came crashing down. I started making mental notes, her favorite phrases, the way she smirked when she humiliated me, the times Blake promised her I would never truly be family. I tucked them away like weapons, waiting for the right moment. I didn't speak of it to anyone, not even Lauren. The power of this plan depended on silence. If no one suspected me, they wouldn't see it coming. The more I thought about it, the stronger I felt. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't bracing myself for Evie's cruelty. Instead, I was observing, learning, preparing. One evening, after Blake brushed off yet another of his mother's insults, I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in so long, a small smile spread across my face. It wasn't joy. It wasn't peace. It was control, finally mine again. And I knew then, without a doubt, that soon they would both regret underestimating. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, Blake casually mentioned that his mother was planning a big celebration for her birthday. "She wants the whole family there," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Even some cousins are flying in." I kept my face calm, but inside, my mind lit up like a fire. This was it. The perfect stage. Evie loved nothing more than being the center of attention, surrounded by relatives who admired her polished image of the devoted mother and perfect hostess. She had spent years tearing me down in quiet, subtle ways. But what would happen when her mask slipped in front of everyone she was trying to impress? That night, when Blake fell asleep, I sat up in bed with the glow of my phone screen lighting the room. My plan needed to be careful, precise. No anger-driven outburst, no chance for them to twist my words. I wanted my actions to be undeniable, to leave no space for Blake or Evie to dismiss me as overreacting. I thought through every detail. Timing mattered most. If I spoke too soon, they'd brush me off. If I waited too long, the moment would pass. No, it had to be when the room was at its fullest, when every eye was on Evie and she felt untouchable. That would be the exact moment I'd take her down from the pedestal she had built. I gathered evidence in my mind, her words, her actions, the phone call I'd overheard. I didn't need to embellish a single thing. The truth was damning enough. I rehearsed what I would say over and over, until the sentences flowed as smoothly as a rehearsed script. Calm, clear, unshakable. I also made sure no one could trace my planning. No texts, no written notes, nothing that could be found if Blake got suspicious. To him, I was just the quiet wife he thought he had broken down, the woman too beaten to fight back. That was the disguise I wore until the night of the dinner. The days leading up to the party were almost unbearable. Evie called Blake constantly, fussing over details, what dress she would wear, which wine to serve, how many guests had confirmed. Every time her name lit up his phone, I had to bite back the bitter taste in my mouth. But beneath the bitterness was something stronger now, anticipation. On the afternoon of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror, slipping into a simple black dress. Not flashy, not loud, just elegant enough to make me look composed. My hands trembled slightly as I applied my makeup, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the knowledge that tonight, everything would change. As Blake jingled his keys, calling out that it was time to go, I took one last look at myself. My reflection stared back, calm and steady. The girl who had once swallowed humiliation was gone. With a slow breath, I grabbed my purse. My plan was ready, my stage set. And as I walked out the door, I slipped my revenge into motion. The dining room glittered with candles and polished silver. Evie had spared no expense for her birthday dinner. Laughter filled the air as relatives poured in, greeting one another with hugs and smiles. I took my seat at the long table, watching carefully as dishes began to arrive. Golden platters of roasted lamb, salmon with lemon butter, and bowls of garlic mashed potatoes were passed around. Everyone's plate was filled generously. Then Evie placed one in front of me. My heart sank, though I had expected it. A plate sat there, completely empty. Not a scrap of food, not even a garnish. Just porcelain staring back at me. A hush fell for a moment, then someone cleared their throat, and conversation resumed awkward. Evie smiled sweetly at the guests as if nothing unusual had happened. And Blake, he didn't even flinch. He reached for the wine, poured himself a glass, and joined in his brother's laughter. But this time, I didn't bow my head. I didn't force down the humiliation like before. My hands rested calmly in my lap as I took a deep breath and pushed back my chair. The scraping sound echoed louder than the chatter, and slowly heads turned. "Excuse me," I began, my voice steady. "There's something I need to say." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes landed on me, some confused, some curious. Evie's smile froze, and Blake shifted uncomfortably. "For years, I've been treated like I don't belong here," I said, scanning the room. "I've been excluded, insulted, and humiliated, right at this very table." My voice didn't shake, even though my heart was pounding. "You've all seen it. Some of you looked away. Some of you laughed. And Blake," I turned toward my husband, "you stayed silent." Murmurs rippled through the room. Evie tried to laugh it off. "Anna, dear, you're being dramatic." "No," I cut her off louder this time. "I'm not. Because I know the truth now." I looked straight at her, then at Blake. "I overheard the phone call. Blake telling you, 'Don't worry, Mom. Anna will never be family. I'll keep her in line.'" Gasps broke out around the table. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. Jason and Mark exchanged shocked glances. Even some of the cousins whispered furiously to each other. Evie's face paled, but she forced a smile. "That's nonsense." But the damage was done. Everyone had heard. The polished image she tried so hard to protect cracked in an instant. And Blake, his face red, sputtered, "Anna, you're twisting things." I stood taller, my voice calm. "No, I'm finished twisting myself to fit into a family that never wanted me. I'm done with both of you." Without another word, I picked up my purse and walked out. The stunned silence behind me was deafening. I reached the front door, just as I heard footsteps rushing after me. Blake's voice called my name, desperate panic. But I didn't look back. The front door slammed so hard the walls shook. Blake stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He didn't even take off his coat before exploding. "How dare you humiliate me like that in front of my entire family?" he shouted, pacing like a caged animal. "You made me look like a fool." I stayed seated on the couch, my suitcase already beside me. My heart was calm in a way it hadn't been for years. "Blake," I said softly, "I didn't humiliate you. You and your mother did that all on your own. I simply told the truth." He froze, glaring at me. "You think you can just walk out after everything I've done for you?" I stood, my voice steady. "Yes. Because I already have." I held up a manila envelope and placed it on the table between us. His eyes flicked down to the bold letters. Divorce petition. His mouth opened, but no words came. For once, Blake Ridge had nothing to say. "I'm done being the punching bag for you and your mother," I continued. "I deserve better than silence, excuses, and betrayal. The papers are filed. This," I gestured around the house, "is no longer my prison." He muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care to listen. I picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. He didn't try to stop me. By the time I reached Lauren's apartment, the weight on my chest had lifted. She opened the door, pulled me into a hug, and whispered, "You did it." Tears prickled at my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from relief. The next morning, my phone lit up with call after call from me. I didn't bother answering. The voicemails were full of shrieking insults and self-pitying rants, her voice cracking with fury that she had lost control. With one press of a button, I blocked her number. Silence never felt so sweet. Days later, an unexpected message came through. It was from Rachel, my sister-in-law. "Anna, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. What you did at dinner, it was brave. I've admired your strength for a long time, and I hope you know not everyone in this family agrees with them." For the first time, I smiled at the thought of one of Blake's relatives. It was a small reminder that even in the darkest rooms, someone else might have been silently rooting for him. That night, I sat on Lauren's balcony with a cup of tea. The city buzzed below, but in my heart there was peace. I hadn't just walked away from a marriage, I had walked back into myself. I may have lost a husband, but I had gained something far more valuable: my dignity, my freedom, and the power to decide what my life would look like from here on out. And for the first time in years, the future felt entirely mine. Do you believe Anna made the right choice by walking away from Blake and Evie for good? Or should she have tried to fight for her marriage a little longer? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you'll always catch the next one.